This morning, we're meeting Montana's poet laureate, whose new memoir traces a deeply personal search for identity. Chris Latre is the author of this new book, Becoming Little Shell, which shines a light on the century-long struggle of the Little Shell tribe of Chippewa Indians for recognition. And Chris joins us now to share his story. Thank you for being here.
I'm Miigwech. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. So for people who don't know your story, what does Becoming Little Shell mean, both as a book, but also as your journey?
Well, so the Little Shell tribe really only became known as the Little Shell tribe in 1978. So we are kind of a diaspora of people who were originally the Pembina Chippewa in North Dakota and became the Turtle Mountain Chippewa, and we were disenrolled by the federal government. So the book Becoming Little Shell is the story of how we became known as the Little Shell Chippewa, named after a hereditary chief of the Pembina Chippewa named Little Shell. And then kind of the double meaning there is my connection to my identity as a citizen of the Little Shell tribe. So it's the threading narrative of the two stories happening kind of simultaneously.
Wow. And you write about growing up identifying as Indian, even while your family, you say, sometimes denied that heritage. So what was really the turning point that you would say that you wanted to dig deeper into your identity?
Well, so I always identified as Chippewa because my grandma said we were, and my dad said we weren't. So that's kind of the conflict, is my father and my grandfather both denied our indigenous heritage 100%, which is not uncommon at all in indigenous communities, and there's many reasons for that. But grandma said so, and when you're a kid, if grandma says one thing and dad says another, who are you going to believe?
Grandma.
Grandma, of course you're going to believe grandma.
Of course, your elders.
Yeah, so exactly. So the realization came when my grandfather died, and I go to his funeral, and that's in the introduction to the book. And the church is full of Indians, all these people who we supposedly weren't related to, all of these other Latres in Montana, and there's many of us. And I realized that the story that Dad and Grandpa had been telling was not the truth. And that was kind of the first real trigger in my mind, is that I need to get to the bottom of this to find out really who we are and where we come from.
And do your own research.
Exactly.
And so one of the powerful threads too throughout your book is the idea of being landless. So please explain.
So, first, what kind of society do you live in where any indigenous people can ever be considered landless in the first place? When we've been here for 15, 20,000 years. So we lost our land to settler colonialism, kind of beginning in the 1850s, and it really came to a head in 1892 with this agreement called the Macomber Commission, known as the 10-Cent Treaty, where Little Shell was not allowed to negotiate with the federal government and was disenrolled with all of his followers. And at the time, hundreds of us became citizens of nothing. We were eliminated from even our Turtle Mountain relationship and became just a diaspora of people wandering across the landscape trying to find places to live. And we were a buffalo culture, and by then the buffalo are essentially extinct as well. So our entire lifeway was destroyed, and we had to figure out a way to survive and ultimately thrive again. So yeah, that's what landless means to me, is not having a place to call home,
Yeah, it makes sense. And you describe moments of doubt and resistance from even within your own family, which you kind of touched on. So how did you really push through these obstacles?
That is something that is an everyday kind of challenge for me, especially because I get asked that question a lot, because my father died in 2014. And thank you. And I had to, I have to reconcile, how would he feel about me telling the story that he devoted his life to making sure nobody knew about?
Good point.
So who am I to tell the truth of where we come from? But it's my story too. And my mom assures me that she thinks my dad would be very proud of what I've unearthed about who we are, because there is a lot for us to be proud of, and our heritage going back hundreds and thousands of years. And I would hope that if he could join us here right now, and in some respect, I believe he is, he would recognize that where we come from is a very magnificent place.
Beautiful. And for readers who may not be Indigenous, what do you hope our takeaway is from this book?
Well, what happened to us can happen to anyone. And I like to feel like anybody who exists in a way where they can't be who they are, where they have to hide. You know, like for us, it's Native people passing as white. For anybody who's in part of a marginalized community who feels like they have to live without expressing their entire identity, I think there's solidarity in our story with theirs, as well as just the long game approach we took to reclaiming who we are. We did it over multiple generations, and I think that's important to recognize also, that big things take time. And often our culture, it's like if we think of something on Thursday, if we can't pull it off by Sunday, we're like, well, the heck with it. You know, why bother? But it takes generations to enact big change, and we're proof of that.
Wow. Wonderful talking with you today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, Chris is holding an author event tonight, Thursday, September 4th at 7 p.m. at Third Place Books in Ravenna. So check that out.